What's up, gamer? My name's Wilucco, and today I'm going to show you how to make the Gorilla Thorns Spiritborn build in Diablo 4 Vessel of Hatred. To start, we have our ability tree here. The abilities are very simple. You just take everything that is a monkey ability and exactly nothing that is not. You don't even take passives that look like they belong to the other spirits. You put 5 points in a Rock Splitter and go up to Accelerated Rock Splitter on the right, Crushing Hand 5 points, and then Advantageous on the left for the knockdown. The passives, you take 1 point in Vigorous and 1 point in Velocity. Follow through, you want as many points of as possible, so we put 3 in, and then we get a bunch of those from some uniques later on in the build. You take all the passives on the left side of the focus wheel, and then 1 point in Mirage and 3 in Unrestrained Power. You put 5 points into Armored Hide and take the Reinforced Armored Hide on the left. Concussive Stomp gets 1 point, and you take the Adaptable Concussive Stomp on the top. As for the passives, you take 1 point in Endurance, 3 in Perseverance, 2 points in Patient Guard, and much like with Follow Through up here, you want to take as many points as possible in Bastion because it gives you bunches of thorns. And as I said, this is the Gorilla Thorns build, so we want bunches of that between our passive points and our gear. For the next wheel, we take 1 point in Payback and go up to Poised Payback for the passive Vigor regeneration. After that, we take 1 point in Resilient and 1 point in Dominant for the small but useful 5% chance to execute non-bosses. For the ultimate wheel, we put 5 points in the Protector so we can summon our boy Wumba and make him super strong. We take all of his upgrade points. Then we take 3 points in Resolution, 1 point in Spiritual Attunement because we don't actually use our resource very much, so we don't care too much about the maximum resource. But then we put 3 points in Supremacy for just extra damage while we're using the Protector. Now for our key passive, we take Prodigy's Tempo. This is pretty much a basic attack build, so we pretty much always have the +2 ranks to all skills going in combat. And even though we don't use core skills for damage, the cooldown reduction is still very useful in giving us more time on Wumba, the Protector, and Armored Hide for the defenses. Next up, you're never going to believe this, in this monkey build, for our Spirit Hall, we take Gorilla for the first one, and Gorilla for the other one. That's right, Gorilla is all we need. Next up for our gear, this build does use quite a few uniques. Out of all of them, I'd say the most important one, and really the only one you really need to get the build up and running, is Razor Plate. This is a Thorns build, and this is the Thorns chest, so it's kind of hard to beat having just a couple thousand thorns on your chest piece. If you don't find one randomly while you're running through the game, you can farm this from Lord Zur. I'd say the next most important unique is Loyalty's Mantle. It gives us a bunch of damage reductions, move speed, a bunch of stats, but really the most important thing is the unique power, which doubles the bonuses from Spirit Hall choices if they're both the same spirit. So if you're Gorilla, everything there gets doubled, which is great. Not only does it double those bonuses, but it also gives us a 60% resource cost reduction on all of our skills, and a up to 60% cooldown reduction for all of our skills as well, including Wumba the Protector and Armored Hide, which is really our two most important spells. If you're looking to target farm Loyalty's Mantle, it drops from Grigor the Galvanic Saint. Up next, we use Sepizantek for our weapon. This drops from Duriel or Andariel, and it gives us tons of bonuses to our basic skills. Even if it doesn't have a greater affix, it still gives you like +5 levels to Follow Through, which is the passive near the top of the tree that gives us like a ton of damage to basic skills and then doubles it for your third attack. And on top of that, it also makes it so that your basic skills deal increased damage and always use their third attack. So basically the bonus from follow through is always doubled, and then when you do hit your actual third basic skill, like while you're using it with Sepizantek, it causes the skill to strike 3 times, like in a larger area. So it's pretty sick for basic attacking. I'm having a great time with it, though there is another option that we have for our weapon that I haven't gotten around to trying yet because the expansion is still pretty new and I haven't really had time. But the other option I think we could use would be Wushe Nakpa. This drops from Lord Zur, and it boosts the heck out of ultimate skills. So if we're going for a basic attack focus, then we use Sepizantek. But if we wanted to maximize the damage for Wumba, the Protector, then we would use Wushe Nakpa. And when I drop a version of this that has like some good rolls and maybe a greater affix or two, then I'll probably try it out and see how well it compares. But for now, Sepizantek has been treating us really well. The only other unique I've considered adding to the build would be Pain Gorger's Gauntlets, which are very good for pretty much any basic attack build, but it would be really hard for me to lose the Fell Soothsayer's legendary power, and I can't very well move it onto my jewelry. But this cause is vulnerable to be applied to pretty much every enemy on the screen anytime we use Armored Hide, so it's very useful for boosting our damage with like very minimal effort. So that's another thing I'll probably try as I spend more time on this character. For the legendary aspects, we use this Fell Soothsayers, like I said, vulnerable when you use Armored Hide. For the pants, we use Layered Wards to increase the amount of damage prevented by block. For boots, we use Ghostwalker for a bunch of movement speed while we're unstoppable. And because of the bonuses we get from Resolve, we're pretty much always unstoppable unless I'm getting really smacked around. For the amulet, it's very important that we use the Unyielding Hits aspect on this slot, because it gives us a bunch of weapon damage based on a percentage of our armor every time we use a Gorilla skill. Since we're using only Gorilla skills at all times, then that's always active when we're in combat, and it's just a absolute boatload of damage. So to minimize the amount of armor you actually need to stack to get that maximum 1500 bonus damage, we put it on the amulet. It raises the amount of armor that is contributed to the bonus damage. And if we had a 45% roll of this legendary aspect, we would only need about 3,350 armor to get the maximum benefit out of it. With 34%, we're still a little under the cap at 3,400, but we're still getting a lot of damage out of this. For the rings, we're using the Rapid aspect and the Moonrise aspect. It's just a bunch of attack speed and damage. Honestly, what's not to like? We may try and experiment with these and swap around for other things, but I would be a little sad to see the attack speed go, if I'm being honest. So for now, that's what's working for us. We're absolutely blasting in Torment 2, and we're kind of hanging in there in Torment 3. Tanky enough to handle Torment 3, but the damage, particularly on bosses, is kind of lacking. So that's our limit right now, but we have a lot of masterworking to do. I have a lot of glyphs to level up. And speaking of glyphs, let's go over those next. So here we have our Paragon board for right now. In Vessel of Hatred, they made it so we can only have 5 boards, including our first one, so that means only 5 glyphs. And these are what we use. We use Colossal for the increased damage with Gorilla skills per 5 strength that we have in the area. But really the bigger deal is the percent increased damage for each stack of Resolve you have. With our doubled up monkey powers, our maximum Resolve stacks get a lot higher. So we benefit quite a bit out of that. I think I'm up to like 14 max stacks of Resolve, meaning like 28% damage. Next up, we use Exploit. When you have the additional bonus from the strength threshold, you just apply vulnerable to everything the first time you hit it. Very simple, very straightforward, and very useful. Next up, we use Hubris, because when you fulfill that additional bonus, you get a bonus of up to 2,000 thorns based on your dodge chance. And thankfully, Spiritborn gets an increase to its dodge chance based on dexterity. So the higher we get on that, the higher our thorns gets. Next up, we have Revenge, which we still need to sort out the additional bonus with the threshold and everything. But when we do get it, it's going to be extremely useful for us because it says dealing thorns damage to an enemy increases all damage it takes from you by 1% up to 15%. Since we use the Gorilla Spirit Hall bonus on the top side, every time we use a Gorilla skill, we deal 100% thorns damage, actually 200% with Loyalty's Mantle, to enemies you hit. So assuming that everything works as it is implied by this text, every time we hit something with that power on and this glyph, it gets that stacking damage bonus and just like gives us a huge multiplier to our damage. So that'll be great when we get it going. And finally, we don't have my 5th glyph slot yet, but when we do get it, it'll be Guzzler for the increased damage while healthy. It's not like the craziest, most groundbreaking upgrade, but we get a ton of barrier when we're using Gorilla skills, so that keeps our health bar very high, a very large percentage of the time. So that'll pretty much always be active for us. So next up, we're going to go over the legendary nodes you should take. I have not optimized the pathing at all on any of this because I still have so many points to go. I'm just kind of throwing them in wherever looks good. But at the very least, I can confirm the 4 legendary nodes you should go for are the Spiny Skin. When you use a cooldown, you gain 20% thorns for 5 seconds. Pretty self-explanatory for a thorns build. Anytime you use the Protector to summon Wumba, or Armored Hide, or any of the other abilities that are not your basic skill or your core skill, pretty much, more thorns at basically all times. Up next is Infighter. When you dodge or block an attack, you gain 2% increased attack speed and 1% increased damage for 5 seconds, stacking up to 9 times. So that's 18% attack speed and 9% damage, excuse me. We're already incentivized to stack up dodge chance from the Hubris Glyph for more thorns. And Sepizantec is a quarterstaff, which means it has 45% block chance built in. And on top of that, we have Armored Hide, which gives us a 100% chance to block stuff while it's active. So we're blocking and dodging stuff pretty much all the time. So this is also a very high uptime buff for us. Next up, we have Sapping. When you cast 3 Gorilla, Jaguar, Eagle, or Centipede skills with the same spirit in a row, restore 15% of your vigor and deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. Considering every single one of our abilities is Gorilla, this is also basically always up, and we're pretty much always restoring our resources. So that's extremely useful for us. And finally, we have Revealing, which is a lucky hit of up to a 30% chance to knock down vulnerable enemies, and you deal 30% increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies. So between the Exploit Glyph, causing vulnerable to every single enemy we hit on the first hit, and Armored Hide causing vulnerable on everything on our screen every time we cast it, we have a pretty good uptime on vulnerable. More crowd control is always helpful, and considering how much we do crowd control between Crushing Fist, Wumba knocking things down, Concussive Kick, and now the Revealing node, we get that increased damage to crowd control enemies very often. So yeah, that's it for the orange nodes and the glyphs. I haven't really worked out which yellow and blue nodes we should really prioritize or skip, because like I said earlier, I'm still kind of just throwing points in where they seem to make sense, and I'm going to optimize them when I get more levels. But that's where we're at for right now on the Paragon board. Next, let's talk about how to go about actually fighting with this build. The general strategy for combat is to have as much uptime as possible on Armored Hide and our good friend Wumba, the Protector, while we run around and hit stuff in all the chaos. With the Fell Soothsayers aspect, Armored Hide will make all of the enemies on our screen vulnerable and give us a bunch of defenses, while Wumba will knock them all down and deal a bunch of heavy damage. And while all that's going on, there are 2 things you can choose between doing from moment to moment. Option 1 is to prioritize damage by spamming our main ability Rock Splitter. Option 2 is to prioritize utility by spamming Crushing Hand, which will knock enemies down if they're hit by both swings of the attack. And if you spam it 3 times in a row, you get a big chunk of cooldown reduction on all of your abilities, including Wumba and Armored Hide. If you use Crushing Hand often enough, it's even possible to finish the Protector's cooldown before Wumba finishes attacking. Just remember that anytime you do use Crushing Hand, it's really best to make sure you use it in multiples of 3 whenever possible, because otherwise you don't get the full cooldown reduction. I would recommend that you basically never use Payback, because we're only taking it for the passive vigor regeneration when we get hit, and using it will take away all of the resource that we should be saving for Crushing Hand. Finally, you can use the last ability, Concussive Stomp, basically whenever you want. It's really handy to reposition enemies and crowd control them for a little while, or to build up the stagger meter against bosses. I personally like to use it to kick enemies into Wumba's attack range when they're standing just outside of it. It's super satisfying. But yeah, that's basically all I have to share so far about the Gorilla Thorns Spiritborn build. I highly recommend trying it out. It's not too hard to get going, and I think it's very fun, even if it's not as flashy as some of the other Spiritborn builds. I'm sure there's some things that still need tweaking that'll get figured out in the coming days and weeks. If you have any questions or any ideas for anything that might work better than what you see me doing, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you decide to try out the build, feel free to let me know how it goes. But that's all I got for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.